Welcome back guys to Voicey here and another r/EntitledParents. Don't forget Voicey veterans to like, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss an episode. This story was called A Mother's Love is More Important Than Your Safety. Hi, this is a story from 8 years ago, when I was still 17, and I was a student for an exchange year in Canada. Let's begin. When I was an exchange student in Canada, I went to live with a host family whose mother worked as a coordinator of the travel agency I associated with. In their house, I had to share a room with a girl, we'll call her Elle, who was my age, 17 at the time. There was another exchange student from an African country, a very reserved boy of our age, we'll call him T. They also had a baby boy who was 3 at the time and a young girl who was 14. It started all relatively well. I started going to the local high school and meeting new people. One thing I remember dearly was actually the school. The first month wasn't bad. I had to adapt to a new way of life and I didn't know if some things were or weren't common. T had a single room. It had to be temporary since there was no room in the house for all 7 of us, and EP, the host mother, asked the 14 years old girl to sleep on the couch. It is mandatory that an exchange student has a bed, but apparently not the children of the family, and the 3-year-old toddler slept in his parents' bed. There were 5 beds and 7 people. Since Elle was very quiet and barely interacted with me, I spoke a lot with EP. I grew pretty affectionate to her within the days. Maybe she really cared about me, but I'm pretty sure she was manipulative at times. Then the host mother told me to ask my parents to sign an agreement that stated I was okay with the other student staying permanent in this house. When I asked about the 14-year-old girl who slept on the couch in the living room with all her sports belongings scattered on the floor, EP told me she already agreed with it. Spoiler, she did not. A month after I asked her if it was okay, and she was mad at me for signing it. Then an incident happened. I've never got along with Elle, the girl I shared a room with. She was quiet but sometimes in a creepy way. I've never seen her laugh or smiling to someone who wasn't the 3-year-old. She was in really bad terms with her 14-year-old sister. Sometimes Dee said she didn't feel like they were sisters, and the only time I asked Elle about her relationship with her sister, she said, "She is a bad person," and cut it off. Elle was strange. I am weird as well. I was really shy and liked anime a lot, but we were peculiar in a different way. I think she had some kind of mental problem. Even though she never said what it was when she was upset, her body would shake in a seemingly involuntary way. I knew she was, luckily, seeing a therapist, and when I asked her if she wanted to speak about it, she just said, "I am crazy," and cut it off. I was very timid and did everything to please the people around me. I think she just gave me a look at the beginning, then judged me not worth her time. She always spoke to me like I was stupid, or at least this is the impression she gave me. I didn't speak English fluently at the time and had a strange accent. Once she asked me if I spoke in this strange way to make her mad. I really didn't know what to say except that was my actual voice. That day was a Sunday morning on early November if I'm correct. She was getting ready for her part-time job and I was getting dressed for a walk with the personal defense group I just started going to. My sports bra was stuck and I had a pretty hard time fixing it. With the time I took, C's habit to lock the door when was getting dressed, she didn't want me to stay there, even if I was doing something else. She started knocking on the door. I told her to wait a minute because my sports bra was stuck. She then started knocking on the door in a rhythmic way, and after a while to sing. Maybe she was just trying to be annoying, but it was freaking creepy. Then she stopped, yelling loudly that she's waited a song already. I covered myself up with a normal bra, the other one was pretty much broken, and opened. Apologized for the time. She was mad at me. Saw my computer screen opened. It didn't have a timer to shut down. I opened it before locking the door and forgot to shut it down. She told me I should not waste her time watching anime or manga. I tried to explain to her that it was different from what she thought, but she treated me as a stupid child and laughed in my face. I went red in the face. I didn't see her because I was still trying to fix that stupid bra. I told her that next time we argued to please not use that annoying tone. I shouldn't have said that. Or maybe I should have called my parents in Europe long before telling them what was wrong with this person. I was facing the wall when I said it, and I heard some rapid footsteps, and before I could have seen her coming, her face was an inch from mine, grinning her teeth. Her eyes were wide, staring at me. She was 20 centimeters taller than me. I don't remember the exact same words, but she basically said, "If you tick me off ever again, I can become dangerous, and it is difficult for me to control myself," in a really low and slow tone of voice. I tried to ignore her, concentrating on my bra, and in a moment she ripped it off my hands and tossed it into the ground. I moved by instinct, put my hands in front of me in a "I don't want any trouble" gesture, as I was instructed by Mr. K, the personal defense teacher. She started violently shaking in her face, like she was having some sort of attack, and I started to yell, calling for help. I was also scared for her, but when I said I was going to call an ambulance, she stopped shaking and asked me, "What the F is wrong with you?" EM rushed into our room for discovering a half-naked me, sobbing, and Elle, who was miraculously calmed down in a matter of seconds and was sitting calmly on her bed. I wasn't able to hear what they were saying because I wasn't able to stop crying. When EM asked me my version of the story, I was barely able to talk. Everything this incompetent woman was able to say was, "Do not lock the door and knock if you need to come inside." Her daughter just threatened me, and this was all she was able to think. This is only part of the reason why I think this belongs here. The same day, I asked for help to a counselor of the agency, and she told me I needed to move out. I wanted to try and fix things between us, but then he asked me if I loved myself enough to understand there was a problem. He also was concerned about the 14-year-old girl sleeping on the couch. He was the main reason why I was able to endure what came next. That night, I wasn't able to sleep next to Elle, and asked EP if I could sleep on the couch just for that night. I remember my best friend in Spain trying to calm me down with a recording of her singing. I've never really realized how much I cared about her until that very moment. The next morning, EM scolded me because I disturbed their sleep, asking to switch place to sleep. The 14-year-old wasn't allowed at all in mine and Elle's room, and they took away her room too for a stranger they've never met before. The only time I told her I was fine to come inside, she argued with Elle trying to defend me. When I told her to please go out, she refused. Then Elle pulled her by the hair, trying to drag her out. Of course her parents allowed her. Of course she wasn't scolded for assaulting a little sister. Elle never touched me, but that moment I realized she was the lowest person I've ever met. When I told her my decision to leave to EM, she said it was fine, but to not make the same mistakes again with my new family. Because not everyone was as nice as them. This was annoying, but it wasn't my main problem. My problem was that EM was the one in charge of finding a new family to host me. There was another girl at the time who was still searching for another place to stay. He was temporary for as much as I know. She passed 2 months waiting for EM to find one. And of course, the agency knew very little about what was happening. EM said that Elle and I just didn't get along. I tried to do as EM told me, asking at school if someone had a place to stay. Day after day I became more and more scared to come home and find Elle. I have really blurred memories of that time, but I was basically a really worried zombie. I then asked the teachers. Some days later, EM was ticked because someone my art teacher knew who hosted exchange students before called her, asked if everything was okay. When I tried to confront her about her daughter's behavior, she shrugged and said, "Never tell a mother something bad about her child." Yup, this is the reason why she was an entitled mother. As I was asking a friend of mine if she had a place to stay, I started crying softly in class, telling her I was scared to come home. She sent a message to her mother, who then asked if I thought I was in danger. I was going to reply that I actually wasn't sure, since Elle was always quiet, but I didn't feel safe at all with her around. I then saw a piece of paper being slided to me by a very tall boy who I knew was friends with Elle. I picked it up confused, and there was written, "I will call name of agency if you don't stop saying bad things about Elle's family." I then told him I was searching for a place to stay and that I didn't want to cause trouble, but to go out of it for my own sake. I told him I was actually asked to search for a place to stay by EM. This didn't include saying why I needed to leave. So I wasn't allowed to say that I've been threatened by the girl I had to share a room with. To this day I still believe what I did was among my rights, at least in a moral way. He then said, "I knew EM for a very long time. This job is how she feeds her children." When I tried to say anything else, he said, "You won't have trouble if what you're saying about asking for help is true." He then told me she texted EM before giving me the note. Those were EM's words. I asked him if I could see the message, but he refused. When I came back to their house, EM was furious. She said I endangered Elle's school future, grounded me, and told me to call the agency's coordinator to tell her my mistake. I was terrified for Elle to get revenge on me. I called and they made me write an apology to both EM and Elle for my behavior. I did it, not because I really thought I had to, but I really did want to calm the situation down. The agency also sent me an email regarding what I did wrong. A warning, as they called it. In the previous months, I was so accommodating that the only thing EM could list on the email was that I've let the 14-year-old daughter in our room when Elle wasn't there. It happened that time I mentioned before when Elle entered and after a brief arguing, pulled her sister's hair. That was the only house rule I broke. I found help thanks to a friend of mine that I've met at school. He and his family took me in. I feel like I was rescued. The first month was like a quiet recovery from all the stress I did endure. Then I realized I had been a victim. I realized I didn't deserve to be treated like crap for asking for help. Elle's father had the nerve to tell me I was trying to destroy his family, even though Elle and her sister were in terrible terms long before I went there. I wanted to inform the agency of what happened, but of course they tried to cover EM's behavior. The only thing they told my mother was that she was a good employee. I've also let another counselor read the warning, and I remember her clearly say they covered their butt. The agency told me if I wanted to speak to a therapist by phone. Saying I was angry is an understatement, and I agreed. This was my mistake. I told her what happened, and I said I've never been so humiliated in my life. Then she asked me if I've never hurt myself. I told her about the time I scratched myself. She paused for a moment, then told me she would have let me know. Before I knew it, I was taken to a therapist. He said that I had developed what I think is called generalized anxiety. I was put for a couple of weeks in another coordinator home, because my friend's family had some medical issues and weren't able to have me there. Still, they really helped me and cared for me until the end of my stay. I have really good memories of them. During these holidays, I was mostly alone, but there was a very friendly dog who loved playing. The head coordinator told me she was going to call me every 2 hours for telling me how the search for the new family was going. She called barely once a day. My mum called me and told me I was going home. I later discovered the agency was waiting for the therapist referral to kick me out with an excuse to do so. The scratch was the main reason they were able to find. Then the fact that some years earlier I went to a therapist because of the separation of my parents and forgot to mention it on the application. My father was forced to come pick me up within hours with the threat that I would have been hospitalized if I did something even remotely suspicious. I was actually doing mostly fine, just a little shaken and worried because they made me skip school. The trip on the airplane went fine. My mother was worried sick and was very relieved when she discovered I wasn't doing really that bad as they described on the phone. I eventually remembered I had the phone full of messages from the counselor and the head coordinator that documented basically everything. I made a report with all the proof I could find, including the warning and a statement of mine. I wish I had kept the note from Elle's friend. The lawyer sent the charges asking 20,000 euros of damages to the agency, who replied with an offer that was pretty low, but at least they admitted there was something wrong. Going to court would have been really expensive, and my parents didn't want to put me through this. I finished school on time. I stayed in the US for almost 4 months, and I was able to catch immediately with the rest of my class. I had to study a little harder than the others for those 4 months, but I was eventually able to not lose a year. At the beginning, I was very reserved about it, and the only people that knew this were my parents and my best friend. Now I'm really open about it, and not afraid of saying what happened. Elle, if you are reading this, I want you to know, I do not hate you anymore. Now that I'm older, I think I can say that. It took 8 years for me to forgive you. I want you to know I really hope you grew as well as I did, and received the help you needed. Whew man, well I gotta say, I really do love the epic stories. You get a lot more drawn into the story and there's just that bit more depth to it, you know? I really hate the thought of having to board with somebody who's basically a crazy person. They're unhinged, make physical threats towards you, or at the very least they're implying those threats, and you just don't know what they're going to do. I mean, if you've seen them literally grab their sister's hair and drag them out of their room, I think most of us would probably say, yeah, thanks, none of that for me. It's like those movies where somebody's trapped in a situation where everyone's against them and there's nothing they can do and no one will listen to them. It just gets to that point where you're just like, gosh, please, somebody help them. Somebody save that person. There's crazy people everywhere. Anyway, I'm glad they got out in the end, because it wasn't looking good there. Post your stories, memes, and fan art at r/VoiceyHere. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell to never miss an episode. Alright, Voicey veterans, I'll see you in the next one.